Masked Mutilator. Sure, why not? So, pulled up streaming service roulette again today, and I don't know what I was expecting here. I got my hopes up a little bit when I always choose the first one from the horror section. However, on the way down to that actual horror bracket, sometimes I see some things down that I'd like to see. Remake of The Crazies. I haven't seen that in years. It looks good. I'd like to see that again. No, keep scrolling. Blair Witch. The newer one. I've heard mixed things, but I still wanted to see it. No. Keep scrolling, keep scrolling. Then we get down, and the one there waiting for me is Masked Mutilator. Okay, sure. Put it on. First thing that jumped out at me, it announced it as being from 2020. Ooh, boy. So it's a small little indie flick. Now, IMDb puts it at 2019, so in there. And I was doing a little looking into this because I had time. The movie was short, it's only like 70 something minutes, so this is a very in and out movie. And some of the problem, I don't know if I'd even say problems, but what they had to work around became kind of apparent. Now, the movie is set more or less as a flashback in present day. I'll get into that trivia bit I just mentioned in just a second, but to understand it, I have to deal into this first. Now, the movie is about a man who survived a incident at a halfway home in his youth, and he's on the radio talking about it. And so it flashes back to 1994, where we pretty much go through the events at his halfway home, which is run by a former pro wrestler who used to be the Masked Mutilator in the ring until he accidentally killed a man, and now he runs a halfway house afterwards. And as a new juvenile delinquent is being brought in, which is our host from the radio, and a guidance counselor, halfway house owner intern who wants to learn how to do this is also there. And as the days go on, people start going missing and bodies start turning up. Could the Masked Mutilator have snapped and be on a rampage? Okay. So, I remember how I said it flashes back to 1994. It's very particular about that. That's because all of the footage in that flashback was actually shot in 1994. And you can tell. It's very dated looking. And even the quality of the film seems to shift a little bit every now and again, but in particular, it looks like it was filmed a long time ago. Because it was. And reading into it further, apparently the script had been floating around since the 1980s. So, script in the 1980s, most of it filmed in 1994, completed in 2019, because they actually mentioned podcasts and the like, so that wasn't around in 94. And then finally put out. So, I guess if you got a dream, don't give up on it. It just might take a while. Okay, so, despite all that, I will say, it was not nearly as bad as I was expecting this movie to be. In a way, the movie has its heart in the right place. Like, at the beginning title card, they actually have a little blurb about halfway houses, and the whole movie almost seems to serve as a public service announcement for kids in this sort of situation. So, okay, sure, I'm with you on that movie. Okay. Now, there are some problems. It's very low budget. Most of the kids look like they're in their the teens that are at this halfway house, all of them are in their mid-20s. The fresh-faced college student who's there as an intern, he's clearly in his mid-30s. Maybe he got held back. Now the acting, it isn't the greatest, but a lot of times you can tell they are trying. And some of them do hit a few emotional moments, particularly at the end. And I'll get to more of that later, because what it does in the credits actually was working for me. But I'll cover that later. I might go into a little bit of spoiler territory for this movie because, quite frankly, no one's going to see Masked Mutilator. It is... There's not enough here to really draw people in. And while it wasn't as painful as Claw was, or as batshit as Easter Casket, it wasn't bad enough to be, oh my god, you have to see this, but it wasn't good enough to urge you to sit down and watch it. I will say, the practical effects they use, while a bit sparingly, aren't bad. And there's one kind of chilling scene of the masked mutilator sawing up a body, but to dispose of it in a furnace, and given how grainy the footage was in that bed, it looked a bit like a snuff film, really, at that moment, and it kind of was creepy. That part was working for me. But for the most part, it's kids act out, will go off on their own, and someone gets killed. Now, the main guy who owns the house, who used to be the masked mutilator in the rig, I can't remember his name now, but all the kids called him Commando. So they did a decent job of portraying him as a tough, hard ass, but at the same time, he knew his business, and while he was very standoffish and firm, he wasn't unlikable, and he towed the line kind of sometimes, but from the audience seeing what's going on, they could get behind him. I will say the movie doesn't make a little sense at the beginning, as the kid who's flashbacking there wasn't there for the beginning scenes of the flashback, but he's here now, I guess. So he comes in about 15, 20 minutes, not even, maybe more like 10 to 15. But before that, they give some stuff going on there, so I don't know how we could tell that part of the story to his podcast host, but there we are. And I will say, it's pretty obvious who the real killer is throughout the movie, and no, you can tell right off the bat, it's not the guy who owns the place who used to be the masked mutilator. It's pretty obvious. I'm not going to reveal it because you watch the movie for 20 minutes and you know who the killer is. They don't do a good job of hiding it. There was at one point where I was like, maybe it was someone else, but no. I always knew who it was. Then it gets a little into the ending, and part of it just doesn't really add up. So the killer, like I said before, had disposed of a body, whatnot, and there's a few other kills he does along the way. Now, when the guy snaps and reveals who he is, eventually he gets taken out. But then someone else comes down, drags his body off, and then begins to dispose of it in the same way. And they never touch on that again. It's like, makes me wonder, was the first kill not him? Is this just them hiding his body? Because it wasn't it wasn't Commando who disposed of the body. It was someone who worked alongside him. And the first kill was a really obnoxious punk rocker badass for the sake of being a badass. So kind of leaves that ambiguous. Who actually killed him? Maybe? Possibly? I don't know. It was kind of unclear. And there's a flashback within this flashback from the killer's perspective of why he's doing this, which makes it a little weird, even that it's someone else's flashback, but where it does get a little uncomfortably gratuitous with a rape scene, especially as one guy's narrating it, and this movie really didn't need it. It's trying to establish for why this killer is trying to get revenge on this halfway house, but it kind of leaves a bad taste. It does not help you sympathize with the killer, like maybe it doesn't. It's just uncomfortable. Now, I will say the end credits did something cool. I did like. They pretty much, for most of the characters, you're slowly introduced throughout the movie. Then they don't go into too much detail on what they did to get here too much. You get kind of a general gist, like some people have had a falling out with their parents or did some sort of petty crime. But at the end of the movie, all the characters are just doing like one-off little testimonials, like as how they got to the halfway house. So it kind of makes you feel for them, or for kids in this kind of situation where they've got no other options and they just have to be here. I mean, because of either juvenile courts sentence them to it, or they just can't be with their parents for one reason or another. One brother or sister duo in it, their mother just was not mentally capable of taking care of them. So the movie does have a good message to it, despite some of its flaws. So that does elevate it a little above some of the things, and just kind of the testimonials these kids are giving of for how they got sent to this place in the get-go, and just why they do some of the things they do. It hits like some heartstrings, and like all the characters, even if they were flat before in the movie, this part they hit through. That alone kind of sold it for me. Now, it doesn't really elevate the rest of the material above it, and I would kind of actually wish the movie was more like the streaming service tagline at it, because that would maybe okay, this might be so ridiculous it'd be awesome, because that said a former masked wrestler faces off against his deadliest opponent, a killer who's at his halfway house. That sounds ridiculous and fun. That's really not what you get here. You just get a by the numbers slasher, almost like a poor man's Black Christmas, really. That might not be the best comparison, but it's the one that's popping into my head. Group of teens in one location, and they go missing one by one. Whether or not people are realizing it, even as things go on, and who the killer is not immediately known. So it's pretty generic. I would have liked to have seen that other movie that was kind of pitching, but because you don't even really get too much of a fight between these two. It's mostly the kids having to face off against the killer. And the movie seems to be almost a product placement for weightlifting equipment, as most of the guys in this movie, at one point or another, are pretty ripped, and I think there are some actual former athletes or pro wrestlers in this movie, and most of them look like it. So there's like 4 or 5 guys in this that are definitely pretty ripped. Okay, this one, 2 MacGuffins. It's not bad enough to get down to the 1, but it doesn't have quite enough to elevate it into even average territory, but I will give it points for at least trying to have some heart, which is rare in a slasher movie. So I'll give it 2 MacGuffins. It wasn't nearly as bad as I was afraid this one was going to be. Alright, I'm probably going to take a break from the streaming service roulette for a little bit, do some more of the ones that have been just piling up into my queue. It's like a gambling addiction. I just keep queuing this up because it's kind of fun to see what I'm going to get in for, but I've been doing them a little bit much. I'm and my backlog is not getting any smaller, so I'm gonna probably hold off on doing that again for a little while, chew through some of the other ones. And next time, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I guess we'll find out together next time. Take care, everybody.